Hey everybody, Evan Kirstel here. Happy Monday. I apologize for that, but I don't apologize for this great conversation today with the CEO and founder at JupiterOne. Erkong, how are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so looking forward to this conversation, Evan.
Me too. And this is such an incredible topic, and you have quite a unique point of view that I'd love to get across to the audience here. Before we start, maybe introduce yourself, a little bit about your background, and who is JupiterOne?
Yeah, I would love to tell you more about me and JupiterOne. So I've been a former CISO and security practitioner for all my career. I've been in the industry doing this myself, right? So for the past 20 something years, and started JupiterOne 3, 4 years ago when I was the CISO at a company called Ifomic. And it really is a lot of the pain points that I've had myself and for my team. And security is still a very young industry and a practice, and we're still catching up to the quick changes of technology, right? So over the past couple of decades, and as a result, there are a lot of new technologies that came up. But I feel that fundamentally there's something that is missing. We don't have the right aggregation and consolidation point to understand a digital organization at a more fundamental level. And because of that, right, because of that lack of visibility and that lack of understanding, using a data-driven approach, a lot of the work that we do in cybersecurity operations and cybersecurity management still remain very manual and less optimized. So that's what the reason I built JupiterOne, to help use that data and engineering mechanism to solve cybersecurity at a more fundamental level.
Brilliant. And before we dive into all of that, you have a really interesting philosophy or take on the security space as a longtime insider. This is a quote I got from your LinkedIn bio here. And I was really intrigued. Vision a world where decisions are made on facts, not fear. Teams are fulfilled, not frustrated. Breaches are improbable, not inevitable. Security is a basic right. Wow, these are pretty bold statements. Is this kind of a utopia you're describing here, or is this realizable in our lifetime? Let's say.
I certainly hope that this is realizable, right? Because I think that probably every one of us can relate to some extent, right? Even if you're not in cybersecurity, and a lot of the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, we easily get frustrated because of the lack of resources or whatever reasons there are, right? And we're unable to make quick decisions, because of the lack of information that helps empower the teams to make the decisions, or the lack of collaboration and people looking at the data from the same perspective or access to the same information to help them move things faster as a team, right? So a lot of that is some of the core problems in cybersecurity as well. And I've been in this industry long enough, right? So that back in the days as a consultant at IBM, we used to say this a lot and says, hey, breaches are inevitable, right? Just be better prepared. Right? But
Mm.
the more we say that, the more I feel like, oh, there's actually something wrong about that, right? There's only two things that are inevitable in life, right? Death and tax. We don't want cybersecurity breach to be another one. So let's do the best that we can to change that.
I love that philosophy. Yeah, it's sort of like healthcare versus sick care, but that's a whole nother conversation,
Oh,
different
I
industry.
love that analogy as well, right? I'm glad you bring it up because that's exactly how I feel as well, right? So I feel like that cybersecurity as a practice has always been more reactive to incidents or to changes or to attacks or whatever the case may be. It's more reactive, right? But it's just like when people get sick, right? You go see the doctor, you take some
Mhm.
drugs to help with those symptoms and help you recover from the pain. But what about the wellness, right? What about the foundational things that you should take care of, right? So I really think that if we do this right and make some fundamental changes in the security program, we can then look at security not just as a treating the sickness, but also a wellness function, right? Not just a policing function, but a long-term health function for the organization.
I love it. Very simpatico. So let's dive into the platform. You talk a lot about cyber asset management, transforming this asset visibility from, a frustrating challenge into a strength. So how do you do that? What's your process? Is it automated? How do you discover assets? And what's the secret sauce there?
Yeah, yeah, great question. Right. So we just talked a lot about having visibility and using data to drive decision making, right? But actually, what data are we talking about? A lot of that data is assets and the configurations and the attributes and the findings of those assets, right? So now let's take a quick step back and think about what is an asset? What do we mean by asset, right? And in a digital organization, by the way, every organization now is a digital organization. Right?
Mm.
They all have gone through or in the process of digital transformation. They all use software defined technologies to drive every aspect of the business function. And a lot of the businesses, they also build their own technology and build their own products for their customers, right? So then if you think about that, then every part of that digital operation built around cyber assets. So it's not just the IT asset, it's not just the technology that are cyber assets. It is the application, the code, the data, the network, the devices, and also the people and the processes. All of those are assets because every part of that today can be software defined and most likely are already software defined, and they're all part of the digital operations. So in other words, right, so think about anything that is part of your technology stack and anything that is part of your digital operation that has value to the business, to the company or organization, then that is an asset, right? Even HR records, right, are assets, right? So, and then how do we aggregate all of those information so that we understand the digital footprint that you're protecting, right? So
Fantastic.
that's what J1 is, by getting all of those together into one place. And then we also create a map, right? Not just get them into one place, like having a Wikipedia of every single city in the United States, but we also build a map of how they are connected. So we can see how things, you can navigate, you can see the risk visually, right? And all of those attributes, both in a Wikipedia, but also in a map, right? That's what J1 provides to represent your digital organization.
Fantastic. So you talk about this approach as graph-based cybersecurity analysis. You
That's
even
right.
describe yourself as a graph geek. So is this not a technique that's being used widely in the security space, this architecture these days? So seems pretty novel approach to our
Yeah.
industry.
Yeah, when we first got started, right? So this, 4 years or so ago, when we first got started, it was a very novel approach. Even though the graph database and graph technology and the concept of graphs has been around for a while, right? So like LinkedIn is built on graph, and Facebook and social media and a lot of those are built on graph behind the scenes, right? Because it represents how things are connected and the
Mm.
complexity of those interconnections. Now, the same thing applies to the entire digital organization landscape and the asset footprint. All of those things are connected in a very complex, mingled web
Mm.
within the infrastructure and the architecture, right? So that's the only way to represent it is through graph. And it's not just a one-to-one connection, it's many to many. And there's n degrees of traversals to get from one point to another. So if you want to think of a use case and say, hey, who has access to that critical data? There might be a lot of kind of intermediate hops you
Mm.
have to go through, right? If a device is compromised, what is the blast radius of that device, right? So there's a
Mm.
lot of those things. In order to answer them, you have to have a graph to answer them.
Fantastic. And that, of course, leads to the power of search in cybersecurity. Probably a little known superpower of most analysts is Google. We're using Google, doing Google searches. But you have your own query language you built, right? So
That's
I
correct.
assume that allows you to search that graph database for not just security gaps, but I guess compliance issues or other things that might go unnoticed.
Yeah, security, compliance, in some cases, even engineering and DevOps questions can be answered with that data, right? Like,
Mm,
what are my production instances, and are they still live, or how are they connected to my data repositories, right? So all those things can be answered with the graph. And if you think about this, right, so this is where we go from aggregating data to building a map or a graph and to analyzing this with queries, right? So that you can actually get insights out of the data that you have. And beyond that, right, it is not just the graph query. Sometimes people think like graph queries can be hard and there's a learning curve, and especially, this is our own version of the query language. But we actually also have a natural language version. You can
mm,
actually come in and ask any question and say things like, hey, do I have any data store in the US East region that are not encrypted? Just ask
mm.
that question. Or even ask questions like, hey, how many people joined the company last month who are in California? Right? That's a non-security question because people are your assets too. And the data is there in the graph. So we can answer all those questions in natural language based on the graph data that we have.
Amazing. So I assume that data can be quite granular, sensitivity levels, criticality, or business units, or you
Yeah,
create your own categories if it's a database.
yeah, definitely.
Now, we have compliance soup out there today. I saw last week another bank was fined another $1 billion for using over the top, messaging services and not being compliant with all of the SEC kind of standards for banking and financial services. I mean, how do you keep track of all of these compliance standards?
Mm.
From PCI, ISO 2701.
Yeah,
It's kind of
yeah.
overwhelming, I imagine, for most CSOs these days.
That's right. It is, right? So if you think about compliance, there are really two parts to it. One is regulatory compliance, right? So those are, you check those boxes and you meet those requirements, and you do your audits and assessments on a, once a year or whatever frequency basis, and produce the evidence and so on and so forth, right? And in that part, let's think about the evidence. The questions you're asking about security a lot of times are essentially the same questions that the auditors are asking you. It's just they show up once a year to ask those questions, right? And a lot of those questions, whether it's a PCI auditor or ISO auditor or SEC auditor, right? So many of those questions are actually coming from the same set of data, but maybe with a slightly different scope, maybe a slightly different way of answering the question, right? So things like all of your users should have multi-factor authentication. Well, you can ask that question maybe 10 different ways for different scopes and for different environments, but fundamentally it's the same question, right? So what this brings to the other aspect of compliance, which is continuous controls compliance.
Mm,
If you have the data of your assets, how these assets are configured, if you have the data about your security controls associated with those assets, so this way that you can use a data-driven, query-driven, automated way of achieving continuous compliance for the actual controls that you should have in place. And then, of course, those can serve an actual security result, right? So meaning the health and the wellness of your security program, as well as producing evidence when it comes time to meet a specific
mm,
regulatory compliance and provide the evidence. So
brilliant.
that's the approach that we take to it.
I love it. You talk a lot about cyber resilience. That's a buzzword these days. And of course, everyone has a dashboard, but how do you make a dashboard efficient and effective for the actual people who need that information presented to them in a certain way, in a certain posture? And how do you manage all these alerts that, people are overwhelmed by who have security or IT roles these days? It's a real problem.
Yeah, there are two aspects of that, right? So there are too many dashboards and there's too many alerts, right? So from a dashboard perspective, a lot of times that people want to get started with some out of the box dashboard. What are the best practices? What should I be looking at, right? So then there are a lot of those that we provide. Like for example, we recently released a device matrix, unified device matrix dashboard. So what is that, right? So that is to say, out of all the devices I have, maybe it's a MacBook, maybe it's a server workstation, whatever those are, and for that device, maybe it should be scanned by a scanner, maybe it should be protected by CrowdStrike, or maybe it should have mobile device management on the device, or whatever those requirements are, or whatever those quote unquote controls or compliance are to protect that device and monitor that device. How do you know that they are there? Right? Because if let's just say that you want CrowdStrike to be installed on your production instances, well, you go to the CrowdStrike console, it's not going to tell you which devices it is not on. It just doesn't know. It's not there, right? So then we use that dashboard or use that matrix to gather all those information from different sources, and then we make a matrix and say we're seeing this device from this scanner, but it doesn't have this agent. Or if we say we're seeing this device from this agent that has something installed, but it hasn't been scanned by this one scanner, right? So then we give security teams a nice view, a dashboard to say, what are the gaps? Very easily look at across the entire landscape of devices. That's one example of a out-of-the-box dashboard. There are incident response dashboards. There are all of those dashboards specifically built for different purposes, like blast radius, I mentioned before, access analysis, and things like that, right? But what's also more important is then how do you apply your own business context to tweak, modify, or create your own dashboards? Now, that's why there are business intelligence tools like QuickSight or Tableau or Power BI and stuff like that, right? But JUpiterOne basically has a lightweight version of that already on top of the data that we have in the app itself. So you can generate your own business intelligence dashboards for cybersecurity. So this allows them to be very precise for your business needs.
Yeah, super approach. Let's talk attack surface management. I'm looking at your website here, and you talk about reducing the attack surface by 150%. That's a pretty bold claim. So, what is your strategy there to back that up?
Yeah, there are a couple of things there, right? So it really has to do with visibility, prioritization, and optimization, right? So that's essentially what you get. Our customers get those three things when you get JUpiterOne. By putting your data, connecting JUpiterOne to your underlying infrastructure, environments, and controls, you get those three things, right? So visibility, now you know what you have. In many cases, people don't even know what they have and what's out there, right? We have customers who turn on JUpiterOne and say, oh my God, I have 10,000 more access keys that were just auto-created by some development scripts that they forgot to turn off at some point, right? Then each one of those becomes an attack surface, right? Because anything that is out there, hanging out there, could become attacked at some point, whether that is directly exposed or internal indirectly exposed. So things that you're not using shouldn't be there, right? So that's one. And the optimization also is, are we using the right resources? Right, but by having the visibility of all the resources that are actually in the environment, you can start to figure out a way to optimize the resources that really need to be used in the environment, connecting to the business, connecting to the product and applications that are being built. And then the third one, the prioritization, right? This goes back to what you were asking a little bit early about the tremendous volume of findings and alerts. So rather than just thinking and saying, hey, I'm going to take the severity of a finding and alert for granted, if the scanner tells me that it is critical, it should be critical. Well, it's almost like, hey, if your lock is broken, is it critical in your house? Well, it sounds like it, right? But is the lock broken to your front door, or is the lock broken in a tool shed in the backyard? Right? Without that context, you don't know. All you know is here's a finding that the lock is broken. Right? So what we do is by having the asset information and understanding the context and the criticality of the asset, So now we have ability to say, well, let's match business critical assets to findings that are critical associated with those critical assets and findings that may be actually exploitable in the wild. And by combining those things, then we can truly give you a way of prioritizing and reducing the attack surface and reducing the amount of findings and alerts in the process.
Fantastic. Well, amazing operational impacts there as well. Um, so you must have some success stories or testimonials from customers you'd like to talk about. Any top of mind you want to share with the viewers here?
I do. Let me see. Right. So we have a lot of great quotes from our customers. Right. So one of them from Caleb Sema, he was the CISO at Robinhood. Right. So he said,
Oh, I love
uh,
Robinhood. Yeah,
yeah, he says JupiterOne's asset monitoring capability is the foundation and core to almost everything in our security operations. Right. It is our one source of truth. Right. So we have a lot of great quotes and customer testimonials like that.
fantastic. So I'm here at VMware's VMworld this week, surrounded by all the tech giants who are here as well. Yeah, how do you, as an early stage company, navigate through the enterprise with all the giant, tech titans, security and otherwise that are competitors, maybe their co-opetition? I mean, what's your approach on the go-to-market and sales and marketing?
Yeah, we focus on enterprise customers, right? So I would say that there's definitely a lot of challenges, especially in today's market, right? So we have to battle with not just competition, but really
Mhm.
battle with um, budget as well, right? So even if we're
Mm,
not competing directly with another technology, but maybe we're fighting for the same budget, right?
mm,
So I think really is to help a couple of things, right? So really is to help organizations understand the core foundational benefit that JupiterOne provides, because
mm.
we will make your investment, every other product that you have, and the investment that you have already made or want to make in your security program better, right? So it's actually a 10x return rather than a 1x, right? You buy something, you get the ROI, right? We're actually making everything else better in the process, more optimized and more prioritized, right? So a lot of that is still fairly early, right? So J1 as a category and Chasm as a category is fairly early, right? So we're lucky to have a lot of forward-thinking, visionary security leaders and security engineering teams who has already adopted JupiterOne. We have more than 100 customers like that, right? So I do believe that there will be more that as we continue to go to market, to the enterprise customers. And we also work a lot with channels and partners,
Mm.
right? So to help guide us into those conversations and bring us into those enterprise environments.
Well, brilliant approach. And, I guess last question here. We're in the dog days, final days of summer. Anything you're looking forward to personally, professionally? Let's say a busy season out there in the enterprise tech world. My September, October is already booking up. What about you? We've had DEF CON here in Vegas. We've had
I just got back from
Black Hat.
yeah, I just
Yeah.
got back from Black Hat and DEF CON myself, right? And we actually did an amazing event over there called the Data Heist, and
Oh,
actually
right.
we actually had a Forbes article covering our event. It's one of the most memorable, if not the most memorable event of Black Hat that we've done, and I'm looking forward to more of that, right? So it is almost like a murder mystery style, very collaborative, very hands-on event with a group of CISOs having fun. No sales pitches, right? Just having some good food and having a good time and solving a mystery, right? So we're actually doing that more the rest of this year across different cities, and very very much looking forward to that.
Well, come to Boston. There's a lot of people who need your help here, there, and thanks for what you do. And here's to a world where we live not in fear and frustration. So, hallelujah to that. And thanks so much for joining and sharing your vision
Of course.
and perspective. It's pretty exciting. Thanks so much, Eric. Thanks everyone for watching. appreciate you. And reach out to JupiterOne.
Yeah.
Okay.